It was a time of fear. There was this palpable, creeping dread that just settled over the suburbs of Seattle, kind of like the persistent Pacific Northwest rain. In the early 1980s, something was terribly wrong in King County, Washington. Young women, girls really, were vanishing. One day they were there, walking along the busy Pacific Highway South, known as the Strip, and the next, they were just gone, swallowed by an unseen predator. Families waited by the phone for calls that honestly never came. Friends asked questions no one could answer. A question began to form in the collective mind of the community, a question whispered in hushed, frightened tones. Who was taking them? And where were they going? The summer of 1982 was hot and tense. The disappearances were piling up, one after another, creating a pattern that was just too terrifying to ignore. It felt as if a phantom was moving through their world, unseen, unheard, but leaving a trail of sorrow in its wake. The only certainty was the growing number of missing posters tacked to telephone poles, their smiling faces fading in the sun. Then, on a Sunday in August, the fear was given a name: the Green River Killer. The shadow was no longer just a feeling. It was a monster with a title. So who was this Green River Killer? He was a ghost, a terrifying enigma, who haunted the Pacific Northwest for nearly 2 decades. His reign of terror began in the summer of 1982. Computers were new. DNA science was the stuff of science fiction. The Seattle area, its coffee, its music, and its stunning natural beauty was about to become famous for something much darker. The killer seemed to appear out of nowhere, like a sudden and violent storm that no one saw coming. He was a prolific and methodical hunter, choosing his moments with a chilling precision that baffled the police. The timeline of his crimes stretched from the early 1980s all the way to the late 1990s, a horrifyingly long period. For 20 years, he moved through the community like a shark in dark water. He was hiding in plain sight. The killer's hunting ground, a specific gritty stretch of road south of Seattle. Pacific Highway South, a busy artery connecting cities and towns, was the epicenter. It was a place of cheap motels, dive bars, and constant motion. People came and went. Many of the young women who walked this road were living on the margins of society. They were runaways teenagers who had left difficult homes and women involved in street-level prostitution. They were vulnerable, often alone and looking for a way to survive. They were easy targets for a predator who knew exactly where to look for them. These victims were not anonymous figures. They were daughters, sisters, and friends. They were so young, many of them just teenagers. The killer's method was tragically consistent. From the moment the first bodies were discovered in the Green River, the investigation was on. The King County Sheriff's Office formed the Green River Task Force, a dedicated group of detectives whose sole purpose was to catch this killer. It would become one of the longest and most expensive investigations in American history. The detectives worked around the clock, chasing down every lead, no matter how small. But the challenges were immense, especially in the 1980s. There was no widespread DNA database. Surveillance cameras were rare and of poor quality. Tracking people through cell phone records was impossible. The investigation relied on old-fashioned police work interviews, shoe leather, and intuition. The killer was careful. He left behind very little evidence at the crime scenes. He was what investigators call an organized killer, meaning he planned his crimes and took steps to avoid being caught, making the detective's job incredibly difficult. And the killer remained free. On that long list of suspects, one name appeared more than once: Gary Leon Ridgway. Who was he? To the outside world, he was utterly, almost boringly normal. He was born in Salt Lake City, Utah in 1949 and had lived in the Seattle area for most of his life. He was a married man, on his 3rd marriage, in fact. He had a son. He held down a steady job for 3 decades, painting commercial trucks at the Kenworth Truck Factory in Renton, not far from the areas where many of the victims were found. He was a quiet neighbor, a regular churchgoer. Nothing about him screamed monster. But beneath that bland exterior, there was a dark and twisted history. The police actually interviewed Ridgway early in the investigation, way back in 1984. He even took a polygraph test, a lie detector test, and to the astonishment of the investigators, he passed. Ridgway, the man who was right under their noses, simply slipped back into his ordinary life. The years passed. The Green River Task Force was downsized, but never fully disbanded. The case files grew cold, but the detectives never gave up hope. They were waiting for technology to catch up to the killer. By the late 1990s, DNA analysis was becoming a game changer. Scientists could extract a unique genetic fingerprint from tiny samples. A drop of blood, a strand of hair, saliva. Detectives took a fresh look at the old evidence. They also had saliva samples from top suspects, including Gary Ridgway. That day arrived in 2001. A forensic scientist made a breakthrough. Using new sensitive DNA techniques, they re-examined the evidence. They found Ridgway's DNA on several victims. Specifically, his saliva was mixed with evidence from Carol Christensen. It was the smoking gun they'd hunted for almost 20 years. On November 30th, 2001, detectives approached Ridgway as he left the Kenworth truck factory. With Gary Ridgway in custody, prosecutors faced a difficult choice. They had solid DNA evidence linking him to a few murders, but they knew he was responsible for many, many more. Dozens of families were still waiting for answers. To avoid a lengthy and costly trial and the possibility of the death penalty, the King County prosecutor offered Ridgway a deal. If he confessed to all of his crimes, telling them where he had left the bodies of his victims, they would spare his life. What followed was one of the most chilling confessions in the history of crime. For 6 months, Ridgway sat with detectives and prosecutors, calmly, methodically detailed his 2-decade-long killing spree. He spoke without remorse, describing his crimes in a flat, detached voice, as if he were talking about his job painting trucks. He led investigators to the remote, wooded locations where he had left his victims years before. His memory was astounding. He helped them locate the remains of several women who had been listed as missing for nearly 20 years, finally bringing a painful closure to their families. In the end, Ridgway officially pleaded guilty to 48 counts of aggravated first-degree murder. Today, Gary Ridgway is serving multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole at the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla. And sometimes, the monster you're looking for is already home.